Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Slaves to the Algo. That's right, Slaves to the Algo. My attempt to demystify the age of the algorithm. I'm Suresh Shankar, founder and CEO of Crayon Data, an AI and big data startup, a podcaster, and the host of this podcast. Slaves to the Algo is an attempt to share my own learnings in the world of data and those of leading professionals in various fields to understand how they are using or being used by data and algorithms in their personal and professional lives. It doesn't try to portray the future as either dystopian or utopian. It merely seeks to bring the use of data and algorithms more into our conscious thinking selves. And nowhere is the use of data and algorithms more intriguing than the world of sports. We've been led to believe that sports is the frontier where purity of personal will is the determinant of success. However, it is increasingly becoming obvious that data can shed light on player performance, on audience engagement, on how teams choose players, how to bid for rights, etc., and so much more. And especially in a sport like IPL that has been managed to become a showstopper in the 12 short years since it was inaugurated, and it's become one of the largest and the best run sports franchises in the world. And today, I'm delighted to have Sundar Raman on the show. Sundar and I have been colleagues before, but what's very important is what Sundar brings to the field. He has over 2 decades of experience in advertising, in media, in sports, and various other aspects of business. He began his professional career in 1995 as a media planner. He literally was in the company that started the media buying revolution in India, Fulcrum, and moved from there to working on various brands to becoming the first COO of the IPL. And in some ways, he is the man who really made the IPL a great success. He was also instrumental in all the challenges of running the IPL, shifting it overnight from one country to another, creating new auction systems, etc. And Sundar has moved on from that to stints in other corporations, and today is also the co-founder of Phase Technologies. It's a cricket-based collectible and gaming platform, and it's on a mission to build what else but a metaverse for cricket. And from the streets of Besant Nagar, where he grew up playing cricket, to now the metaverse, Sundar is both a media man and a data man, working very much in the field of cricket. Nobody better to have on to explain the intricacies of the IPL than him. Welcome to the show, Sundar.
Thank you for having me, Suresh. And if you can just translate whatever you said, serves good as my introduction, which I've been struggling to put together. It's the most impressive one that I've heard of myself. Thank you.
I'm always willing to be a brand ambassador, Sundar, and since you know how to monetize these rights, I'm expensive. But Sundar, you've been in this field. I mean, literally your entire career has been filled with handling data for brands, for advertising, for sports, etc. But before we go into the professional, I'd like to ask, a more personal question, right? We're all affected as professionals in the technology industry, but we're also affected as individuals by the development of data and AI. And can you share me an example of some algos that you've come across that has, somehow, you said, oh my God, or oh my God, I'm fearful. But in the field of sport, which is the field that you do, and I mean, something that was like, wow, I didn't know data could do this.
I think instead of being in the field of sport, something more personal was the advent of social media and how you felt like you were in the Truman Show. Anything that you said, everything that you said, suddenly you say, holiday in Turkey sounds nice. Then you start seeing Turkish Airways ads on your, on your feed timeline. I wouldn't say it was scary. It was a bit of a glut, if I may say so, in terms of the intrusion that happened, and that actually, pushed me into another zone of, what does decentralization look like? How do things look if there is no central authority? And if you look at it from a digital evolution standpoint, a Web 1 and a Web 2. Web 2 could have been what Web 3 is serving today, which allowed a Web 3 development to happen. I think that sort of changed some perspectives, helped me change some perspective, helped me look at the world slightly differently. And it's more a book that I read, which actually put me on that path, which was The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which actually said a few things which most people are shy of saying, and what Algo could do, and what the slaves of Algo is doing is actually can actually be a demon or a blessing, depends on how you use it, and therefore it tells you that fine line when you cross it, when you don't. So that's been my personal experience, which helped me change perspectives, change careers, change at least get myself immersed in newer technologies and newer spaces, which hopefully won't go that way.
Hopefully not. And, I think most of us who worked in data and AI are also hopeful that Web 3.0 will actually be decentralized and not end up being, where data doesn't end up being the property of a few large platforms. But going back into that, I do want to tell a little bit. I mean, you used a lot of data for sport. And I do want to think, is there anything that you came across when you moved from being just this whole media planning into getting into sports, right? Was there something, that whole transition that happened before we get into anything that you do with IPL, that itself must have been a very, very big transition for you. What was that led by? The excitement of sports, the use of data, and what was it that led you to make that change?
I think if I have to bring it to closer to a sports practicality, is most people rely on instinct, and an innocuous comment by one of the cricketers in a matter of fact conversation made me look at some streams of data to actually validate or hypothesize what is and what is not. One of the things that that I came across when this cricketer mentioned was, it's difficult to bowl to left-handers at depth, and it didn't strike me. I said, maybe because we all think death is flogging and death is going hammer and tongs at somebody. Then I went as back as Michael Bevan days to Lance Klusner and all the left-handers, and actually realized the economy rate of some of the best bowlers against left-handers at death is higher than against right-handers.
Is that so? Interesting.
It is true, and that allows you to validate a few of the other things. And that's not serendipitous in terms of data validation. It's serendipitous by way of a comment of an educated, informed, experienced cricketer who just meant it without any support of data, or more instinctively, more intelligence-based rather than data-supported. When you go back and validate it, that makes you replan, rethink, strategize, and say, hey, how can this be used? Sometimes we wait for data to say the things that we want to hear, or suddenly throw us something which is very interesting and exciting. But the fact is, if you don't ask the right questions, data is not going to help. In this case, it was a comment that actually made me look at data very differently, and sort of made things look very, very different from that point on, and say, hey, is this something that is worth investigating, exploring, and hypothesizing? And that I thought was a very interesting fact. And then you look at it, you go back and say, Alan Border as a finisher, Michael Bevan as a finisher, Lance Klusner as a finisher, Albie Mockle as a finisher, JP Duminy as a finisher, Ravi Jadeja as a finisher, David Miller as a finisher. You suddenly see that as a stream of data. It may not be true in 100% of the cases, but I think it is true more often than not.
And that's just delving a little bit deeper into that. I read this interesting article recently saying that to the level that data is available, that the best ever bowler in the history of the world ever against left-handers is Ravi Ashwin. Apparently, his strike rate, his economy rate, his everything rate against left-handers is like, wherever you go, whatever thing, you can take all the variables out of play and it's the best. And that was very interesting to me because, I actually went into the data of that article, and there was a lot of stuff that showed how under practically any circumstance, he was like that. And the question is, he obviously didn't become great because of the data. But when you have data like that, how does a sportsman start to use it? And you've actually walked and talked with many of these sportsmen. So can you give us a few examples of how people, you go and give them this data, how do they use it? I mean, how do they process it as a sportsman?
On a lighter note, I think people think Ravi Ashwin is an off spinner. He isn't. I think he also bowls off spin. I think that's sort of a part of the mystery, right? And that's what makes him a great bowler and a candidate for all things that you want to be solved in a difficult situation. And that's true of many of these guys. You take the examples of left arm spinners or pie chuckers to certain sets
Peterson.
of batsmen, right? Yeah. So I think there are people who have busted myths, and there are people who have fallen for the same myth. I think it is nobody goes into a game, as far as I know, thinking about, hey, I'm good against left-handers or I'm good against right-handers. They play the situation, and they get the best of their craft and skill out. More often than not, it is sort of muscle memory in a manner of speaking. You understand the player. Ravi Ashwin is a kind of guy who probably watches every ball that the opponent batsman has played before he goes in for the game. And I think there's a very interesting piece about how he bowled to Steve Smith in the Australia series and how he got him out in the first few tests. I think preparation defines everything. Some people don't want to confuse themselves with data. They just go very clean in their head and say, I don't want too many distractions. This is what I want. There are some people who go with a lot of data, understanding analytics, and say, this is the situation that I need to create to be able to exploit the situation. So I dry up the runs.
But just to go into that. So today, if you take the world of cricket today, does a player go to the analyst and say, hey, I know I'm going to go up against this batsman. Can you give me some data? Is there a more collaborative approach, or is it primarily driven with the analyst going and saying, hey, you should be doing this? How does it work today? The dynamics between, let's say, the analyst in a team, somebody like P-Dog or somebody, and the actual players. Where does it
I think
start?
there is. I think it is more symbiotic. More players are wanting more understanding of their own game. They started because they want to understand their game better. That's how it starts, and then they start to understand the game better. And I think that's a marked shift that's happened. And analysts are an integral part. Matchups are a big thing these days, right? And some people think it's overrated. Some people think it is important. There's streams and streams of data around matchups against, bowling to a batsman at the early part of his innings, to latter part of the innings. Getting people to buy into that belief system is what the analysts do. I think they have to prove themselves in terms of, here are the situations, this is what has happened, this is what is proven to have happened, which may convert some of the, non-believers into believers. But it all starts off with, hey, let me help you understand your game better. And data is a way to help you understand your game better, and that enriches the game overall. And there's active conversation.
And do they face the same kind of, Sundar, again, you worked in media where we worked with clients. I do that all the time with data and AI. And part of the time, you mentioned something very interestingly. The analyst has to go and convince the player that I have an insight that can help you. That's what we do with clients, right? But you know that when you go to the clients, that's a very hard problem because they all come with their own biases, their own prejudged, views of what the business should be. Are sportsmen like that? Are they more open?
They are far more open. I think if somebody is going to help me improve my game, I'm going to give that 10 minutes or half an hour or 1 hour of time to listen to it because it makes me better. And there is a definitive marked improvement. In the case of a client, there may be a cost of risk which is slightly different in terms of the player. At least as far as I know, an analyst giving information to help a player understand his game or the game better has never broken anybody's career. So, to me, it's worth listening for sure. It's definitely worth listening for sure.
And is this largely restricted in the T20 format, or do you think that now it's becoming more and more common across formats? Are people preparing more like this, even let's say in test matches, which have traditionally been seen as a more kind of a long form skill, persistence kind of a play, as opposed to, the matchups that are very frequently characterized a T20 game?
I think the matchups is a matchup irrespective of format. I think it's you versus the player. So from the analyst lens that I've had the opportunity to work with a few of them very closely. Test cricket, the cost of not understanding your game is far more higher than in T20, right? At least you get to play more T20s in the real sense. So, in fact, it is even more relevant to understand because you have to set up a situation to exploit a situation, whether you're a batter or a bowler, right? I think that is very, very aggressively looked at. So it's not. It's generally a belief saying it's only relevant in T20 or misconception that it is relevant in T20. I think it's relevant if you're playing the game. It's a question of what you choose, how do you choose to. The mood with which a batter or a bowler goes into the game may be very different. Because in a test match, you're far more accepting of leaving the ball as against playing the ball as in T20. but that doesn't change the fact that you understand your game better. And I think that's what world over people are focusing on. Help me understand my
So
game
here's
better.
a hypothesis, Sundar, and I want you to validate it with your vast knowledge of both the game and the data. You watch a lot more cricket than I do. My belief is that over the last 5 or 6 years, the use of data has been one of the fundamental reasons why bowlers are much more consistent in the lengths and lines that they bowl today, overall, even in Test cricket, as compared to maybe a decade ago when it was still seen as a skill, it was seen as a bowler skill. But nowadays, I actually see every bowler coming out with this clear plan, length line, almost across all teams in this thing. Would you agree with that hypothesis?
I think data is one part of it, but not necessarily the fundamental part of it in my view. I would probably put it to the size of bats. When you give a batsman the size of bat that and he's stonking the bowler, you have to change your game. You don't have a choice. I think increasingly cricket becoming more and more a batter's game is making bowlers much more smarter. I think that's important factor in terms of change the environment, change the conditions, you change yourself. And I think that's very, very interesting and important from a bowler's perspective, because at the end of the day, each of them are competitors and they want to compete. And you didn't give the advantage to the bowler. It's the same old ball as it was 100 years ago, right? You change the color of it. That's the best that you did. And that's not the way that cricket has moved in terms of the number of players in the field, the field restrictions, the size of bat, the size of boundaries, uncovered wickets, covered wickets. A lot of things has changed. And I think, and you even curtail the number of bouncers. So, what do you do?
So that now brings me to a last question, and it's a thing. In your experience, do bowlers listen to analysts more, or do batsmen listen to analysts more?
No, I think it's left to individuals. I think it's got nothing to do with bowlers or batters. I think anybody who wants to improve their game, look at data to understand it, but not necessarily be slaves to it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this one question. In all your years of at the IPL, you've been advising the Mumbai Indians, you've followed a lot of sport. Can you give us a couple of really great examples of how somebody used it on the field of play, a piece of data to do something that was that helped the team win or help win a matchup? A couple of really nice examples would round it off before we go to the next part of this.
No, I wouldn't put it to data, but what I found interesting was probably instinctively, if you go back to the 2010 IPL final, which was CSK versus Mumbai Indians, when Kieron Pollard came into bat, MS Dhoni placed the fielder right behind the bowler. And it was pretty unique at that time, and most people have started to do it. And he hit one straight to Matthew Hayden, if I remember the player there. And Matthew Hayden has his palms are the size of yours and mine put together, it actually changed the course of that game in my view. Whether it was supported by data or not, I wouldn't know. But the fact is, it wouldn't have been without some understanding of the game or the understanding of the batter's ability to play a game. And I think that changes a few things in cricket. And I think people have started to follow that and implement some part of that as the new batters come in, understanding the left-handers versus off-spinners situation, or the wide Yorker situations that people bowl, or the slow bouncers. I think those are all changing tacks in a game, but not necessarily supported by data. They're just being intelligence over information. I think you use the intelligence with the information, you become a better cricketer.
It's interesting because for as long as I can remember, even playing cricket, that you almost had this instinctive feeling about what to do in particular people whom you played against repeatedly. And I guess data is nothing more than the capturing of that intuition in the form of a coded system, and then translating that back and feeding that back and saying, hey, listen, this is happening. And in some cases, it supports you. In some cases, it may remove a bias. I think this is a question that will interest a lot of people who are listening out here. Dhoni, does he use data, or is he just a guy who's got this only intuition?
You should ask him that.
You know him. You should be telling us the answer.
I can't speak for somebody else's belief systems.
That's a cop out on that, but we'll go on to that. So what's also interesting is if you go off the field of play, and I think you look at the use of data in sports and algorithms in sports, what's very clear is that the IPL basically started off, it was a great idea. It just started off somebody, and you were at the beginning. So perhaps you can walk us through some of the beliefs that led the team to believe that this would be a great thing. And especially this idea of the auction system for players and, and how it grows. So right from the beginning to where it has evolved, I think there's nobody better to tell us how this has gone.
I think the when it started, the euphoria was backed by a sound media deal, and that gave assurance on sustainability of the business and longevity. So you could move the other markers. If you have too many moving parts, you're never going to be able to build a business. So if that part of it and a vital cog was stable, then you could move around a whole lot of the other pieces. Then the franchisees came on board, and the quality of the caliber of franchisees was one part of it that I added to the entire game. And obviously the experimentation of city-based franchises, while it may have been pretty common at that point in time, or very commonsensical as we look at it, 14 years later. The fact is, at that time there was a deep what should I say, apprehension, anxiety about, is this going to work? Will it work? And I think our moment of truth, as we defined to ourselves, was Brett Lee bowling to Sachin Tendulkar in Mohali, full house, Sachin edges, caught behind. Is the crowd going to cheer or boo? What is going to happen? And that was the moment of truth. And once it started to get going, we were reasonably convinced after the first few games. And I think that time there was still belief system that 59 matches is not going to work. It's okay, novelty, few matches, fine. I think it sustained the momentum. And before you got to all of that, how do you roster in players? I think the entire rostering in players was critical part of it. And sometimes when you don't have too much time to think and analyze and do all sorts of permutations, combination, you get down with doing things, and that's what happened in the case of IPL. It was, I think, a tea time conversation with some people, and this was why we do it like the Christie's or the art auction, and that made sense, and said, okay, it's worth going with it. And that allowed rostering of players. It allowed fairness in terms of discovery of price. It allowed players to be bought within a salary cap, so all the money in the world couldn't buy all the players that you wanted. I think that was important from a construct standpoint. So to me, the auction is one of the methods. I think what goes behind the scenes in terms of player regulation, the dynamic nature of availability of players, injury, replacements, and the entire set of regulations running into 40, 50, 100 points. That is what is the nub of what the IPL is. If there is like a black box of the IPL, that's probably it.
And when you look at the auction which recently concluded here, and there's been a lot of interesting thing about how people have gone about putting together the teams and all of that stuff, right? And without going into the game theory part of the auctioneering, because obviously everybody is trying to do some of that stuff. What really does a franchise, how does a franchise sit around and say, this is what I'd like to pay for a particular player and why I think this particular player is worth more? What's the way all of these strategies are formulated, and what kind of data goes into them? Apart from the obvious data of performance, which says I want this player because I know he's very good. The whole idea is that, how does this pricing equation work? Is it pure demand, supply and bidding, or is it actually, because sometimes you find people are paying a lot of money for a player which nobody else seems to really value that much. And other times you find there are players that people should be picked up and then they don't.
I think if I can summarize it in 2-3 bullet points or headline stuff, one of it is clearly demand supply. I think, and that's not at a individual player level. That is at a set of there is a supply of overseas batters, top order. There's a supply of overseas bowlers. There's a supply of Indian bowlers. That kind of groupism. And how many, for example, if you take an opener, each team will require at least 2 openers, if not 3, as backup. So across 10 teams, there are 30 opening slots, and with retention, you probably already have 8 or 10 retained. In which case, the other 18 or 20 is what is going to happen. And within that, if you broadly categorize as a tiered system, I think these are players who will walk into 11. These are players who will you will want to nurture and keep as backups. I think that's the way you say, okay, therefore, what kind of openers do you want? And if you have a preference for a left-right combination, that's how the demand supply works at a skill or specialism
So
level.
let's say in each of these categories, in some category, if you feel that the demand is going to be far greater than the supply, you basically allocate a larger chunk of money for that particular type of player.
You don't necessarily allocate a larger supply of money. You will need to pick and choose and say, if I have to go in for this, what else gives? I think at the end of the day, if I were to summarize, I say 2-3 bullet points. One is demand supply, right? The second is value of a player over time. Clearly, that's important. A young player vis-a-vis a player who's got experience, and over a period of time, okay, I see value in this player being a part of my ecosystem for time to come. I see a cyclicity of, so this year was a big auction, right? So you're going to have the player for a 3 to 4 year period, right? As against if you had a last year's auction, it was a 1 year value for the player, and therefore you want to burn your purse. You don't mind paying top dollars for a player because it's a 1 year risk, right? That's one second part of it. Third part of it is recency. I think performance recency weighs in reasonably well in terms of players' performance. You do look at current form. You do look at conditions. You do look at what this works, this does not work. This guy is in the news, whether it's a batter or a bowler or an all-rounder. I think that's a factor that weighs in. The fourth, I think, is a bit of a softer aspect. Generally answered is culture. Does this kind of a player fit into my cultural ecosystem? That kind of stuff, which sort of overlays into.
And when you say culture, you don't mean it's all Indian teams in a way, but you mean culture in a playing style. You want to play.
It could be a coaching definition and say, I want this type of cricket. I want this brand of cricket to be played. And I think that defines my DNA, or that defines how I'm looking at it. It could also be organizational culture, right? It could look at saying, I have familiarity with this set of players, so they played with me. I'd like to have them back, or I like why do you choose coaches very differently, right? It also fits in not because he's the best coach alone. He's also fits in with your ecosystem, and I think those are relevant and important factors of auctioning. And the last one, of course, is availability. I think, are they going to be available? Continuity of trade, whether any other tours which are going to come in the way. Am I going to get the entire season with him so that my dependency goes up? Those are some of the stuff that you look at it. I think that's how generally the auction pricing strategies are evolved. When you go into the auction, the preparation is immense, right? People choose to do mock auction where each members of the support group take up a specific role, which allows you to do price discovery in a simulated environment. So you take the role and you give a belief system. Okay, they're going to look for an opener. They're going to look for a foreign fast bowler. They've had success with left-right opening combination or left-right bowling combination. They've had success with fast bowler. The wicket is a turning track, so it may be slow. You may need one more spinner than others. So
do people do these simulations over a few days because they actually are trying to get the whole thing, all teams together?
I think they do it over a few days, over a few rounds in terms of round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5. So you arrive at certain skills and understanding over a period of. If you had to be, it's like play acting, right? If you were to be playing that role, how would you choose your team? And with a purse, with a salary cap and stuff like that, and somebody else is competing for it. So that gives you some insights into price bands rather than price itself. The last part of it, which is the most important part of it, in my view, is people don't necessarily pick players by name. There are a few players who you pick by name, or you want by name, right? Rest of it, you pick specific roles that you want to fill. I want a top order batsman who strikes at 130 plus strike rate, or I want a finisher, and these are the 4 options that's available for me. I want an express quick bowler. I want a mystery spinner. I want a middle over bowler. I want an off spinner, and these are the options for me. So that allows you to say, I'm not falling in love with a name. I am fulfilling a role, and therefore these are the players who will give me that role. And then you categorize and say, this is ready to walk into the 11. This will take a little bit of time. This is investments into the next 5-7 years, and therefore what combinations? That's how you allow 23, 24 players, and each one has a kind of a backup, and some people get opportunities.
And I wondered whether you watched that YouTube show that Ravi Ashwin put out with P Dog and Nani after the thing, practically on the day of the action. I don't know whether you saw that, but it was a very interesting. For the first time, I saw a player really doing a real time analysis end of the day and literally going into each thing and why they, I mean, he was talking to other people, including analysts, as to why the teams are constructed, what money was being paid for a player, how a team strategy was evolving. I don't know whether you saw that show. And
I
it
caught
is
glimpses of it. Honestly, it was mid-auction, midstream, and I think there's some quality content that is put out there. I put this amongst that in terms of the quality of narrative and understanding of from a player's perspective.
absolutely the understanding of the game, not just, I think, for me, what was very interesting about the conversation, Sundar, and it'd be interesting to get your views, is there was an understanding of the game and there was an understanding of what the economics of an auction would be and how we were putting it together, though it wasn't like necessarily looking at the pool. And that I thought was very fascinating. And to find a modern day cricketer doing that in the middle of his career, one of the best players in the world, was, I thought, fascinating.
I think it is an interesting sort of segue into another side of the scientist, Ashwin, if I may call him that. I think the important thing to note is nobody goes back from an auction unhappy because they paid lots of money or some money to buy a player out of their own free volition, right? I mean, I paid X dollars to buy a player. So there's no post-purchase dissonance on, oh, I bought him, I didn't have a choice. I don't think anybody says that. And also, I'm a firm believer that you don't win a championship in the auction room. You win a championship on the field of play. And I think there may be over-stress and over-importance and a bit of exaggerated reality around the auctions that may carry away a lot more fertile minds with greater imagination to talk and analyze and do combinations. The fact is, you're buying players based on that day, and a player could get injured. You may go in for a replacement. You may find substitutions. Look at the example of Chris Gayle. Who would have thought in that year he flew in from the Caribbean and went on to win the most valuable player in that series, and he was not even picked in the original draft. The fact is there are different motivations and there are conditions, situations, environments, availability. I think a lot of things weigh in winning a championship, and consistency of performance over a sustained period of time is there to stand by good quality players. I think it's an important factor in choosing a big auction.
And that is such a great this thing, right? I mean, it's not one. In fact, somehow to me, sometimes I feel that the auction itself has become like a media property that generates excitement among the fans and stuff like that. But finally, we've seen some, right from the first IPL, when Rajasthan Royals won it and nobody would have given them a chance, to the number of times that CSK has seemingly, like, with the same set of players done it. So it's obviously, your price at the auction doesn't really necessarily always completely correlate to your value that you deliver on the field of play.
Yeah, look at it. Go back to 2018, right? And I think that was the auction when everybody said CSK picked up Daddy's Army. I mean, for a Daddy's Army, the next 4 years they did 3 finals, won 2, lost 1 of the last ball, and 1 year they didn't make it. Not bad for Daddy's Army, right?
Absolutely. And being a strong CSK supporter, just love the fact that Dhoni turns up every time and does it. But so the one last question on the auction before we go to another segue into another area of data and sport, which is, interestingly, at the beginning of the IPL, you chose the auction route, the salary cap, a little bit more modeled on the NBA rather than the football transfer route of what the EPL and the La Liga and all of them use. And in some ways, I think that's made the IPL what it is. But could you walk us through some of the thinking around non-transfer open market versus the auction cap route?
I think football ecosystem is very different. I think football ecosystem has a transfer window which allows for player transfer mid-season, and that's an established system, and for a sport that is played over 8 months. The NBA and the March Madness and the draft system is another way of rostering in players. I think the IPL system looked at all the options, and somewhere along, constrained by time, constrained by or benefited by not over analysis, went ahead with the auction. The reasons why IPL went ahead with the auction was fundamentally saying we must give all the teams an equal chance at the silverware. I think in the first 3 years, 7 of the 8 teams made it to the playoffs. which is not bad if you from a structure standpoint, and that is determined by a salary cap more than anything else. So you have the salary cap, and as I said, the regulations, which is which is the black box in the IPL, made a lot of changes behind the scenes. Putting in the uncapped player into the auction, allowing size of squad to be restricted, allowing for replacements over a period of time, and there's a various other thinking pieces that went into making the auction. Auction is, as I said, the centerpiece. It's almost like a media event, as you called it. The fact is, it's business day. It's you're going and buying players because that's like buying your assets for a business or buying your raw material for your business, if I may call it that. I think that's what that event does. But outside of it is the environment, is the opportunities, is the facilities, is the dynamism in thinking, and everything else that provides the game time for each of those players. So to me, the thinking was very clear. Let us put some basic principles in place which should stand the test of time and way beyond our lifetimes. I think, which is every team should have an equal opportunity. There should be evenness in the way pay is determined. There should be a fair market price discovery for the players. Those are some of the tenets that went into making the auction or the IPL regulations far more stronger than what it was.
So that was such a fascinating discussion. I think there's more to discuss about the use of data and algorithms in sport in terms of audience engagement, in terms of the economics of the sport itself, broadcasting rights, and so on. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you for listening to us today. It's been a great chat with Sundar Raman on how data and AI is a key influencer in the world of sports and the IPL, both on the field of play and off it. We'll be back for more with Sundar in the next episode on broadcasting, franchise economics, audience engagement, and the Metaverse. Slaves to the Algo is available on YouTube, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. We release a new episode every fortnight or sometimes even every week. And if you really like this episode, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember to stay safe and, more importantly, to stay relevant in the age of data and AI. We do not want to be a slave to the algo. Thank you.